A grandmother left a wheelchair-bound boy in a hospital and never looked back. Years later, he discovers the unforgivable truth. Noah Sullivan had spent his entire life with one unshakable truth. His grandmother had abandoned him in a hospital when he was just a boy. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. He remembered that day vividly, even though he had only been 6 years old. The cool sterility of the hospital air, the smell of antiseptic, the distant hum of voices that never spoke to him directly. And most of all, he remembered the way she walked away, without turning back. For years, he tried to convince himself that there had to be a reason. Maybe she had been sick, unable to care for him. Maybe she had passed away. But deep down, a small voice always whispered the truth he didn't want to face. She had chosen to leave him. Noah had spent the rest of his childhood in and out of foster homes, shuffled between institutions that cared for children like him, those without families, those whose names weren't attached to warm, welcoming homes. He had learned early on that people only stayed for as long as they had to. And now, at 20, he had long since stopped believing in second chances. His wheelchair hummed softly as he maneuvered himself through the small apartment he barely called home. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal. He never saw the point in decorating. What was there to celebrate? But today, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, the past felt heavier. He had been having that dream again. The one where he was small, cradled in warm arms, a lullaby humming just above his head. He never saw the face of the woman singing to him, but the melody was always the same, gentle, filled with a love he had never known in real life. Noah shook off the lingering feeling and reached for his laptop. If his mind refused to let go of the past, maybe it was time to stop running from it. That's how he found himself staring at an old newspaper archive website. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard before typing in the words he had never dared to search before. Missing child. 20 years ago. He pressed enter. And that was when his entire world began to unravel. Noah's eyes skimmed over the search results, each headline a fragment of the past he had never known. Most were unrelated, stories of missing children who had either been found or lost to time. He almost closed the page, ready to let the past stay buried. But then, his gaze locked onto a headline that made his breath hitch. Baby mysteriously disappears from hospital, family desperate for answer. His fingers trembled as he clicked the link. The article was dated 2 decades ago, from a small-town newspaper he had never heard of. His stomach twisted with unease as he read the first few lines. On the night of June 4th, a newborn baby was taken from St. Mary's Hospital under circumstances still unknown. The infant, Noah Reynolds, was last seen in the nursery before vanishing without a trace. The devastated family pleads for any information that may lead to his safe return. Noah's breath came in shallow gasps. Noah Reynolds. That name didn't belong to him. He had always been Noah Sullivan. He had no memory of another name, another life. But there, beneath the article, was an old, grainy, black and white photo of a baby. And though he had never seen a picture of himself as a newborn, something in his gut twisted painfully. Somewhere deep inside, he knew. His mind spun, grasping for explanations. Could it be a coincidence? Had he somehow imagined the connection? He forced himself to read further. Witnesses reported seeing a woman in a nurse's uniform leaving the hospital around the time of the disappearance. Authorities released a composite sketch of the suspect, but no arrests were ever made. And then, at the bottom of the page, he saw it. A digital scan of the original police sketch. Noah's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the drawing. It was rough, faded with time, but the moment he saw the face, something inside him shattered. It wasn't just a stranger's face. It was her. The woman he had spent his whole life believing was his grandmother. His world tilted. His skin went cold. The woman who had left him at that hospital hadn't been his grandmother at all. She had been his kidnapper. Noah's hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind screamed at him to shut the laptop, to forget what he had just seen. But it was too late. The truth was out, and it was suffocating. The woman he had called Grandma his whole life wasn't his grandmother. She wasn't even family. She was the reason he had spent years in foster care, convinced he was unwanted. The room around him felt smaller, the air thick. He reached for his phone without thinking, his fingers hovering over the search bar. Noah Reynolds. The name felt foreign and yet strangely familiar. His heart pounded as he typed it in. Search results flooded the screen. Social media profiles. Old missing person forums. And then a name that stopped him cold. Reynolds' family still searching for son stolen 20 years ago. Hope never dies. Noah's stomach turned. His family, they had never stopped looking for him. His fingers trembled as he clicked the link. A recent interview appeared, dated only a few months earlier. The article featured a couple in their late 50s, their faces worn with years of grief. "We just want to know if he's okay," his mother had said, her voice breaking. "We don't need explanations, we just need to know he's alive." Noah swallowed hard. Alive? That word shouldn't have hurt, but it did. They didn't know if he was alive. They had spent 2 decades wondering if their baby had survived. And all this time, he had been here. Alone. Noah barely registered the tears streaming down his face. His entire life, every painful, lonely year, had been built on a lie. He had grown up thinking he was abandoned, unwanted. But that was never true. His kidnapper, the woman he had trusted, had left him in that hospital not because she didn't want him, but because she had never been meant to have him in the first place. And now there was only one thing left to do. Noah had to find her. He had to hear the truth from the only person who could give it to him. The woman who had stolen his life. The woman who had walked away. And this time he wouldn't let her leave without answers. Noah's mind raced, his body frozen in place. He had spent years believing that no one wanted him. That he was just another forgotten child in a system that didn't care. But none of that was true. His real family had never stopped looking for him. And the woman who had abandoned him in that hospital, she wasn't a grieving grandmother who couldn't take care of him. She was a kidnapper. A liar. Noah inhaled sharply, forcing himself to move. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he searched for anything about her. But she had disappeared from his life so thoroughly that even the internet seemed to have forgotten her. Except for one place. A small, outdated online registry of caregivers from a nursing home. There she was. Her name wasn't listed under staff, she wasn't working there. She was a resident. A deep, unsettling chill crept through Noah's chest. He had imagined this confrontation 1,000 times, but he had never pictured her old, frail, vulnerable. Did she regret what she had done? Did she think about him at night, wonder if he had survived? Or had she moved on, erasing him from her memory the same way she had erased his real family from his life? Noah didn't know what he wanted from this. Closure? Revenge? Answers? He wasn't sure. But he knew one thing. He had to see her. Noah's heart pounded as he wheeled himself through the front doors of the nursing home. The scent of antiseptic and faint lavender filled the air, a strange mix of sterility and forced comfort. A receptionist looked up from behind the desk, offering a polite smile. "Can I help you?" For a moment, he considered turning around. He could leave right now and pretend he never found her. Pretend the past didn't haunt him. But that wasn't an option. Not anymore. "I'm here to see Eleanor Sullivan," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The receptionist typed something into her computer. "Are you family?" Noah hesitated. The words stuck in his throat. Family. She had never been his family. Not really. "She raised me," he said finally. The woman nodded, then gestured toward the hallway. Room 214. Down the hall. Second door on the left. Noah swallowed hard. Every push of his wheels down that hallway felt heavier, like he was moving through water. His breath was shallow, his pulse erratic. He wasn't ready, but he had to be. When he reached room 214, he hesitated for only a second before knocking. Silence. Then a soft, rasping voice, "Come in." Noah pushed the door open, his breath catching in his throat. There she was. Eleanor Sullivan, or whatever her real name was, sat in a worn armchair by the window, a thick blanket draped over her thin frame. She looked smaller than he remembered. Weaker. Her hair was white now, her face lined with deep wrinkles. For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then she let out a slow breath. "I knew this day would come," she murmured. Noah's hands tightened on his wheels. His voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "Then why didn't you ever try to find me?" Eleanor didn't look surprised by the question. If anything, she looked sad. "I couldn't," she said. "Couldn't or wouldn't." His voice was sharper now. You kidnapped me. You took me from my real family. And then, when you got tired of me, you threw me away." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, as if bracing herself. "Noah, that's not even my real name, is it?" His chest heaved. "I was Noah Reynolds. I had a mother, a father, alive, and you stole it." She flinched but didn't deny it. Noah leaned forward, his hands gripping his wheels so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Tell me why," he demanded. "Tell me why you did it. And don't lie to me this time." Eleanor's lips trembled. She looked out the window, as if searching for the right words. And then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, "Because I lost my own child. And I couldn't live with the emptiness." Noah's stomach twisted. This wasn't the answer he had been expecting. And it was far from enough. Noah stared at her, his breath shallow. "Because I lost my own child." The words echoed in his mind, but they didn't make sense. They didn't excuse what she had done. They didn't erase the years he had spent alone, believing he was unwanted. "You lost your child," he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "So you decided to take someone else's?" Eleanor's fingers trembled as she clasped them in her lap. Her frail body seemed to shrink under the weight of his words. "I was broken," she whispered. "I was desperate." Noah clenched his jaw. He didn't care if she was broken. She had broken him, too. "You don't get to use grief as an excuse," he said sharply. "You stole a baby. You stole me. And then, when it got too hard, you abandoned me. Like I was nothing." Eleanor winced but didn't argue. For years, Noah had fantasized about this moment. He had imagined screaming at her, demanding answers, making her feel the pain he had carried his whole life. But now sitting here, looking at this frail woman who barely resembled the figure from his childhood, all he felt was exhaustion. "I didn't plan to take you," Eleanor said after a long silence. Her voice was distant, as if she was speaking to a memory instead of the young man in front of her. "I was visiting a friend at the hospital that night. I walked past the nursery, and I saw you. You were crying." She swallowed hard, and something inside me just snapped. Noah's stomach churned. He imagined that moment, a grieving woman staring through a glass window at a row of newborns, and then choosing one. "I thought I could love you enough to make up for what I lost," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And for a while, I did." Noah's hands tightened on his wheels. "Then why did you leave me?" Eleanor exhaled shakily, looking down at her lap. "Because I realized I had done something unforgivable. And I knew I couldn't undo it." She glanced up at him, her eyes clouded with regret. "I thought leaving you at the hospital would give you a second chance. A real family." Noah let out a bitter laugh. "You don't get to act like you did me a favor. I didn't get a real family. I grew up in the system. I spent my entire life thinking I was unwanted, while my real family was out there looking for me." Eleanor's eyes widened, a flicker of something, shock pain, crossing her face. They looked for you?" "For 20 years, Noah said, his voice raw. "They never stopped." Eleanor covered her mouth with a shaking hand. For the first time, he saw genuine horror in her expression. But Noah didn't care. It was too late for regret. Too late for everything. Eleanor's face crumpled as she absorbed Noah's words. Her hands trembled in her lap, and for a moment she looked small, like the weight of her choices had finally crashed down on her. But Noah didn't feel sympathy. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "You stole me," he said again, his voice cold. "And because of that, I lost everything. I grew up thinking I wasn't wanted, that I wasn't worth loving. Do you know what that does to a child?" Eleanor shook her head slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I was saving you," she whispered. "I thought I could give you love." Noah let out a hollow laugh. "Love? Do you even hear yourself? You kidnapped me. Then, when you couldn't deal with what you'd done, you walked away. How is that love?" Eleanor flinched, but Noah didn't stop. "I spent years in foster homes. I had no one. No birthday parties. No bedtime stories. Just strangers cycling in and out of my life until I aged out of the system. And all that time, the people who actually loved me, my real parents, were out there searching for me." Eleanor's tears spilled over, but Noah felt numb. "I didn't know," she murmured. "I thought I thought they'd moved on. They never did, Noah said, his voice sharp. They still want me. They always wanted me. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Eleanor wiped at her tears with shaky hands. I know I can't fix this, she said finally. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. Noah exhaled, his chest heavy. He had spent his life hating this woman, blaming her for every moment of loneliness, every night spent wondering why he wasn't enough. And now, sitting here, looking at the fragile shell of a person she had become, he realized something. Hating her wouldn't change anything. Nothing could give him back the years he had lost. Nothing could undo the damage. But he still had a future, and he refused to let her have any more power over it. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, he admitted. But I do know one thing. Eleanor looked at him, her breath unsteady. What? Noah's fingers tightened on the wheels of his chair. I'm going home. And with that, he turned and pushed himself toward the door, leaving behind the woman who had stolen his past, but not his future. Noah didn't look back as he rolled through the hallway of the nursing home. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath uneven, but he kept moving, faster, as if putting distance between himself and Eleanor would somehow lessen the weight of everything she had told him. But the truth was a shadow. It followed him. When he reached the exit, he paused. The doors slid open automatically, revealing the world outside. The air was crisp, the sky a soft gray, as if the universe itself understood the storm inside him. He had spent his entire life believing he was unwanted, that he had been left behind because no one had cared enough to keep him. But now he knew he had been wanted all along. His parents, his real family, they had never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. And now, after 2 decades of silence, they would finally hear his voice. Noah pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. He stared at the article he had found about his family's search, at the contact number listed at the bottom. For a long moment, he hesitated. Would they believe him? Would they want him after all this time? A voice inside him whispered, they never stopped wanting you. Noah took a deep breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then a voice. Hello. A woman. Soft, hesitant. Noah's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Hello. The woman said again, a hint of worry in her tone. Noah forced himself to speak. Is this Margaret Reynolds? A sharp intake of breath. Then silence. Noah swallowed hard. I think I'm your son. A strangled sob broke through the phone. No. Her voice cracked, filled with a mixture of disbelief and something deeper, something raw and real. Is it really you? Tears burned Noah's eyes. His hands trembled against his wheels. It's me, he whispered. And in that moment, the weight of his past, the pain, the loneliness, the unanswered questions began to lift. He wasn't alone anymore. He had never been. And now, after 20 years of silence, he was finally going home. What would you do if you were in Noah's shoes? Should he forgive the woman who stole his life or walk away forever? Let us know in the comments. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story like this one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like. It helps us keep bringing you more incredible stories.